Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here. I see more people coming in. We've got plenty of room. So there are a lot of really good talks happening right now, so we are absolutely thrilled that you're here to talk about science communication. If you saw the plenary speaker yesterday, Jack Bobo talked really, I think, very eloquently about the need for science communication, the need for scientists to talk science. And we want to build on that discussion today. So we'll talk a little bit about theory, a lot about practice in science communication, and our goal, this will be a very informal, workshop-y kind of session. Our goal is to give you tools so that when you leave this room today, you'll have a better understanding of what it means to take your personal research and translate it into a story that's compelling to a non-scientific audience. So I'm Jim Brady, and I'm a professor and department head of plant pathology at University of Minnesota. Our institution has thought and talked and worked towards science communication for a long, long time. 92 or 93 years ago, the faculty in the department started an annual news magazine called the Aurora Borealis that we still publish every year. And I'm sure 92 or 93 years ago, the faculty were not using the phrase science communication. But in fact, it really is a very important tool for us today as we think about translating our research to a broader audience. More recently, Carol Ishimaru, who is professor of plant pathology at University of Minnesota and a former president of APS, chose science communication as the theme for her meeting, which was the Providence, Rhode Island meeting some years ago. So science communication is something we think about a lot. I've been department head for 4 years, and one of my priorities has been to help our students, staff, and faculty develop as communicators in their own right so that they can go out and talk science. And do so very effectively. As we've moved towards that, I very quickly realized that I don't know that much about communications. It really is a field into itself. It's its own science with its own data-driven approaches. And we were fortunate enough to hire a professional, my co-author and the leader of today's workshop, Mr. VanBoxtel. So Dylan's been with us for 2.5 years. He has a bachelor's degree in plant sciences from University of Minnesota, but has a lifelong passion in communications. So he actually interned with our extension communications team. He's a self-trained videographer and for a few years worked as a freelance videographer for agribusinesses. He joined our department 2.5 years ago and has really transformed our communication strategy. We actually have a communication strategy now, which is something that we didn't necessarily have before. But Dylan's done some really innovative things in the realm of science communication. One of the things that he's led for our department is this idea of enabling our student, staff, and faculty, helping them understand what good science communication is all about. And so that's the basis of this workshop today. So Dylan works full-time for our department. He's also studying towards a master's degree in strategic communications, and as of 2 days ago, he is engaged to be married. So congratulations, Dylan. And I'm just going to turn it over to Dylan and let him run the rest of the session. So thank you very much for being here.
Thanks, Jim. Can you guys in the back hear me? I'm going rogue. I'm cool. Thank you. I hate podiums, so I'm going rogue on that. So since this is a talk about storytelling communications, Jim introduced me, but I wanted to start with a story about me and give you some background about why I think we're here today. So if you would have told me a super long time ago that I would have ended up in ag, I would have told you you're nuts. So for me, what I was always passionate about and fascinated about was story. I grew up, I was a super shy kid, so writing and stories were my way to kind of engage with people and talk more broadly. Went to school, thought I was going to be an English major, realized I wanted a career one day, and decided that I'd be an environmental science major, and surprisingly enough, ag was what resonated with me, and so I eventually transferred to CFANS, the College of Food, Ag, and Natural Resource Sciences, where I got a degree in applied plant sciences. Research wasn't for me, but I was really, really inspired by the storytelling idea, and I looked back at my hometown. I'm from a small town in northeast Wisconsin, rural dairy farming community, and realized that people weren't telling good stories about how science was impacting those communities in a really authentic way. So got super interested in video, the visual stuff, and now I'm really, really pleased to be able to communicate, hopefully bring science into people's doors every day and show the impacts of our great students, faculty, and staff. So thanks for being here. I'm super excited to be here. I think you guys are all here because you think this is important, and that's me. That's my natural habitat, soybean. Look at that. That's actually a selfie, but I won't go there. I think this is why we're here. If you're like me, you're kind of pissed off right now. I think it's really easy to look at this situation right now and say, you know, something's been taken from us as scientists, as a field. But I think it provides a really unique opportunity for us to look ourselves in the mirror and realize something's wrong here. And when I look at the situation, it's my personal belief that it revolves around, a lot around communications and that age-old adage of if you don't tell your story, someone else will for you. But the reality is that you guys want to get your message out there. How do you get your message out there? It seems a little daunting. And how do you do it in a way that doesn't dumb down your science? I get that. I hear that all the time from our researchers. And how do you do this knowing that this isn't your primary role? You have so many other things that you're doing on the day-to-day. How do you do it in a way that's really, really beneficial? And the reality is you've maybe had a bad experience, whether that's news or with, you know, a local, you know, affiliate of your university or institution, etc. And it's kind of led you to think something along these lines. You know, presenting science as stories, as narrative, and communicative, you know, ways might be useless fluff that undermines your work. It's manipulative. It's not truly authentic. It's a little bit over-exaggeratory about the work that you're doing, a little bit over-romanticized. And is the story really going to do anything for me in the way that I support my research program? Oh, gosh. So I want to challenge you guys today to take a step back, think about what you know about communications, push it to the side for a little bit. And if you guys don't believe anything I say, that's okay. But I want you to think a little bit differently about communications. And I want to provide some things for you as scientists, as students, to be able to actually move the needle. Because the reality is you're investing your time in this. It's got to make some kind of impact, make some difference for you. So my challenge is what you guys have asked me to do today would be like explaining the field of plant pathology in an hour and 15 minutes. Like Jim said, communications is a science. It's a little bit of an art. And so I wanted to tease out some things that I think will put you in a good position to get you guys started. And I think if you guys are doing some of these things and at least taking these things into consideration, you're on your way to some good storytelling. And really by that, all that means communications in all actuality. So we're going to break this up. I'm going to talk for some time here. We're going to break this up with some exercises for you. We're going to power through those. We're not going to get through them. But I want to see how far you guys can get through this. And then also I want to make sure that we leave some hearty time for discussion and Q&A. And we'll also be providing some resources after this because I know you guys will have more and more questions. So number one, listen to your audience so that you can talk with and not at. You know, so many times I'm sitting at my desk or I'm at, you know, departmental coffee and I get scientists coming to me. They're like super, super jazzed. Like, we've got to do this. We've got to tell our story. We've got to create a press release. We've got to do this. I see this from my communicators, which makes me want to roll over. We've got to create a Snapchat because all the kids are on it. And the reality is, they're like, we've got to tell. And I want to tell them this, to stop and listen. Because this is what happens in my head. Because the reality is that, you know, you as consumers are drowning in all of this information. Think of all the things that come in your inbox, your social feed, and if you're not personalizing and catering those communications to your audience to some degree, you're going to get lost in the sauce. And that's the reality. I mean, think about all the things that you guys are interested in. It might be science communications where you just click through it. You might not actually engage with it. You've got to find a way to truly and uniquely kind of reach your audience. Because if you know who your audience is, you know what platforms they're on, you know what things they're using to engage, you can find a way to actually reach them, to actually get information to them. If you know how they talk about a topic, it can actually be a conversation. You can talk with them as opposed to at them. And we'll talk a little bit more about the importance of that. And if you know what they want, you know the right way to frame your story in a way that resonates with them. And if deep down, and we'll talk more about this too, what sparks the interest or fills the needs of your audience, You know what a good story is to tell. So many times I hear people come to me, Dylan, what's a good story? Dylan, what's a good story? I don't know what to do. And Jim always says this, and I really appreciate that all of our stories in our department are interesting and unique. It's just a matter of telling that in the right way. So I come back with, who's your audience? You got to know who your audience is. And at the end of the day, if your audience knows how their life is better, how the work you do, the info you're providing is changing their lives, you're showing them as opposed to telling them, the opportunities to make a difference are really, really endless, and you can move that needle. So there's so much information out there in my world, the marketing and communications world, that says if your consumers feel like you're actually having a conversation with them and talking with them and speaking their language, you're going to create business outcomes. And I think in a lot of ways that really, really applies here. And this is a quote from Dr. Kevin Foltes. Some of you might know him. He's from the University of Florida. And he's a really great science communicator, really big advocate for technology. And he talks a little bit about this with as opposed to at. I made that mistake that many scientists make. I was arrogant, I was speaking over their heads, and I buried them with information. What I wanted to do is make them feel better, but instead I made them feel worse. And if there's anything I've learned in the last year and a half, it's that empathy is really, really key. And looking at issues in the way that your audience members look at things is really, really important. And empathy can truly be a discovery asset for you. To read this quote here, empathy helps us communicate our ideas in a way that makes sense to others, and it helps us understand others when they communicate with us. And that's really, really key. So we're going to talk a little bit about natural fit audiences, or a little bit audiences that are kind of easy wins for you. We'll also talk about what I like to call broad audiences, so audiences that might not be, super interested in science and things like that, but we'll start here. And it's a little bit chicken before the egg kind of conversation. When you think about these ideas, think about in your heart of hearts, what is your value proposition? What is your research? What do you want to tell people about? And we'll talk more about this later because it's kind of disorganized how this happens, but who realistically is going to be interested in your work, the outcomes of your work, the information, educational information you might be providing, and or to whom is it most important that your message is heard. That's identifying your audience in one way, shape, or form. Once you've identified your audience, I think it's really important to understand your audience and dig a little bit deeper. And this may seem a little bit foreign to you guys, and traditional advertising agencies take quantitative data, they take qualitative data, they do all this massive information, but you can glean a lot just by getting out and talking with people, having some kind of informal conversation with them, and really gathering some kind of qualitative information from them to get you here. And you can also probably take a little bit of a guess. You'd be really, really surprised. So what is your audience interested in? What aren't they interested in? What are their values? What is their lifestyle? And how does your work, your information fit into their lifestyle? What do they want to know? What needs aren't being met? And what might be their misconceptions about your work, the information you're providing, etc. And please, please, please be specific in some way, shape, or form. I hear so often working in an institutional setting, Dylan, my audience is everyone. I promise you it's going to be very, very difficult to do that. You have to be a really, really, really creative person to create something that resonates with a bunch of people. I mean, think about it. Like J.K. Rowling, people like that are the super creatives that can create that. And also, getting that information in front of all people is going to be really, really difficult. So many people use this, that, and the other as a platform to actually engage with. Everybody wants their information in their own specific way. You're not an ad agency. You guys can't do that. It's going to be really difficult. And then, yes, you can go more broad in your audiences, but you got to remember it's going to be a little bit of a fight. Think about customer acquisition cost in business. It might not make a lot of sense for businesses to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars so a customer makes one purchase. The same thing is true for your own human capital, your time. It might take you a lot of time, and you can do it, but just know it's going to take you a little bit more time. And get obsessed with your audience. I really, really mean that. Get out there, talk with them. I'm lucky, I get to go out and shoot video. I get to just hang out. I get to kind of get all this information from them, see what's missing, answer some of these questions I just brought up. But really the great storytellers of our time were really great listeners. Now this is a deep dive because this is my world, but we wanted to find out, this isn't science, but this is one segment of our graduate students. We were thinking about recruitment. These are just kind of a mess, a hodgepodge of what we gleaned from some of the quantitative and qualitative and informal things. But just putting this to paper was so huge for us because we realized we could just put simple pieces of content places that we were missing that students wanted, or we can create, change some of our admissions processes to make sure that students are getting the right information, the right time, in a very timely manner. And so this was a really great way for us to do that. So let's take some time and do this. I think Jim handed out some sheets for you guys. You can either write some things down or talk with a neighbor, but it might be great to narrow down, pick a topic in one of these three categories. We got phytobiomes, durable disease resistance, and emerging plant diseases. So take some time, do what you can to work through exercise 1, and then we'll come back and I'll interrupt you in 5 minutes.
And we only brought 100 sheets, and we have exceeded that already. So if you didn't get a sheet, please turn to your neighbor and share with us. Thank you.
Also, if you guys want these after the fact and you're sharing, note there's some QR codes on the bottom, so scan those, save them, do whatever, just if you don't have a copy right now. All right, I hate to break up what seems to be good conversation, but I want to make sure that we leave Q&A time and we power through this thing. Like I said, those resources will be available. Actually, we'll have an even more extended version of that based on some of the other things we talk about today, available online, which is also available via one of those QR codes there. So this is something that I've been really honing in on, is giving the audience something they want and finding creative ways to actually promote by giving people something. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, hey, sell to me, hey, advertise to me, hey, tell me how great you are. I mean, even as an institution, I think that we struggle with that sometimes. Like, we're the University of Minnesota. We're creating the next generation of leaders, which I feel like we are, but that doesn't necessarily resonate with people. And this is extreme, I know, but what you want and what your audience want might be harshly different, or you might perceive it to be harshly different. So I think this was mentioned in the plenary session, but finding the common ground is something that's really key. Think about what you want, what info you want to provide, what story you have to tell, what's the cool value proposition about the work that you're doing, the person you are, and what your audience wants, what they're interested in, what their misconceptions might be, what their needs might be, what's missing for them. Finding ways that you can tell stories that people are actually really interested in. So this is something that we've been honing in on in our department in plant pathology. And while this isn't directly selling science stories, we're kind of indirectly using it as a bridge to tell science stories. So for us, we're interested in a few things. Promoting the field of plant pathology, promoting the science of our students, and quite frankly, recruiting the best students that there are. And prospective students, they're interested in, do you guys have the research that I want to do? Is this program for me? Is this a high quality program? I might have a bunch of offers. I have some decision anxiety. How do I know this is for me? And they want to know if this is a culture fit for them. They want to feel as if they can understand the student experience to some regard. So this is something that we created, and I don't know what legal grounds I have to do this, but if you guys copy this, I might have to come find you. We did this My Plant Path, the path to plant pathology. So plant pathology, as you know, is kind of a discovery field. We just wanted students to get on camera. We wanted to write some stories. How did you get interested in the field? What's great about being in our graduate program right now? What work are you doing? And what do you want to do in the future? How do you think this has positioned you? So this is a great way. We provide links to research stories. This is a little bit soft, but we want to use it as a bridge to get people into plant pathology more broadly and into our graduate program. So the videos usually are kind of an appeal, and then we work the text to be a little bit more science-centric for us. So I'm actually going to try and play one of these. We'll see if it works. I don't promise anything.
A lot of people don't know that, just like humans, that plants can get sick. And I think that's kind of what plant pathology means to me, in that there's a lot of different things that you can do to try to prevent it, but it's just a really complex process that involves a lot of moving parts. I grew up in a nursery greenhouse in a small town in South Dakota, and growing up, I didn't like plants. I was just doing what my job was, and I'd always been around plants. And it wasn't until I got to college and I had changed my majors a couple times, and I ended up having to take a introductory plant pathology course, and it changed my life. As soon as I took that course, I knew that that was what I wanted to focus on. Just knowing that there were so many diseases out there and that it involved so much more than just plants, trying to deal with the environment, the plants, and a pathogen, I just thought was taking it to a whole level with complexity, and that's what I really wanted. What's the best part about being involved in plant pathology? I would say the variety. If you're a horticulturist or a microbiologist, you only get to deal with typically one thing, either a plant or a fungus or bacteria. In plant pathology, it all comes together and you get to deal with both, so you don't ever really get bored because you can put your energy into one or the other to kind of balance it out. So I just think that having the variety of multiple organisms is a lot of fun.
So as you can tell, there's a lot going on there that's more than just telling science stories. But like I said, we try to use this in kind of a holistic strategy to tell science stories. And I was actually just talking to Jim earlier today, and I was like, you know, why don't we go back in time and make sure that we're linking some of the pubs that these students are involved in. It's a really simple fit to bring people in, visual appeal, and then actually show some of the science that they're doing. But, I mean, you might be wondering, like, this seems really, really in-depth, but getting in terms of knowing the audience, but this is a really simple example that I think works really well. Bob Blanchette, who's a forest pathologist in our department, he's a faculty member here at the U. He's working on a disease, heterobasidian root rot. It's very new in Minnesota and could be very, very devastating to pine plantations. So Bob just looked in the mirror and said, you know, foresters just don't know about this. He just took that and ran with it. Foresters don't know about this. They need to know about this. They need to know how they can manage it. And so I'm actually not going to show this video, but please check it out on our YouTube channel. But really it just came down to taking into account what the growers needed and what the growers might be interested in. And that's as simple as it needed to be. It's a direct need. It's a little bit on the extension ground, so to speak. But we had some really great success. And not only did foresters really engage with this, it was a really great addition to Bob's program. Actually, he's funded by LCCMR. I actually don't know what that officially stands for.
It's money that comes from the state of Minnesota.
Yeah. And so they saw these and they're like, these are great. They're serving a need. Let's get these in front of all Minnesota legislators. And so that's a direct, give Bob something he wants, and you give your audience something they want. Here's another way to kind of think about it. And now we're getting a little bit more broad. So for those who might not be as interested in science, you know, that right side of that Venn diagram might just be apples, or it might just be, hey, I really like French fries, or something really easy. And it's just this age-old idea of taking something people know, they enjoy, and just flipping it. That constant, you know, that age-old rhetoric of how it's made, behind the scenes, did you know? I bet you didn't know that. You know, simple things like that can actually go a really long way, and you're not leading with science, so to speak. And so that's a really great, easy way to kind of extend that out and get it in front of broad audiences. So, last exercise, I promise. Take a stab at this. Take a look through exercise 2 based on what you guys provided for exercise 1, and just go for it. All right. Well, I hate to interrupt once again. I really do want to provide enough time for questions because I know there's a lot out there. So we're going to keep moving. So we could talk for days and days about traditional narrative approaches to talking about science, but for me as a communicator, I don't think all communications problems as it revolves around science. I don't think that narrative approaches is always the best way to do that for many, many reasons that you can probably think of in your head. But storytelling is really, really important from a narrative approach. So narrative is a way of communicating, and storytelling kind of gets used a little bit inappropriately, but narrative is a particular kind of storytelling that has certain components that you can probably think of. You know, think of the once upon a time stories, you open up a storybook. Those are more narrative-based approaches. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So tell a story, brings people in, provides context, and stays with them. So this is the romance. Tell me the facts I'll learn, tell me the truth I'll believe, but tell me a story and it will live in my heart forever. But really, think about the stories that you guys love, the stories you watch with your significant others, the ones that you read to your kids. Think of some of your favorite ones. They feel good. It feels good thinking about them. And I think that you can actually make people feel that way about your science if you tell your stories in a certain way. That's the romantic vision, but in all actuality, there is a lot of data that comes out of communications, psychology, and beyond that really focuses on the ways that narrative affects cognition, retention, all of those different things. And so, to sum it up, research suggests that narratives are easier to comprehend and audiences find them more engaging than traditional, logical, scientific communication. There's a bunch of literature out there right now on the narrative effect, so I would welcome you to read a bunch of that. I won't dive super deep. At the end of the day, I think storytelling is about two things: appeal and context. Whether that's emotional appeal, maybe it's entertainment, and providing context for the work that you guys do. So I guess this is a fake example, but I heard it in one of my classes, and I had to tell you guys because it's the perfect example of those two things. So the rumor goes that there's this gentleman who's standing on the side of the road. He's got this sign that says, "I am blind." He's begging for money. Doesn't have any money in his can. So George Ogilvy is a longtime famous copywriter in the world of advertising. Sly George whips out his Sharpie, takes the sign from this gentleman, and says this: "It is spring and I am blind." And I know this is super fluffy, but this is really great, concise, contextual storytelling. And the age-old story goes, suddenly he's got money in his can later on. But really think about this. This provides context. This makes people think about why they love spring. You guys are plant people. Why do you guys love spring? Think about that. It provides some context to really understand this man's situation and the situation he's in, providing that context. And so one way to provide context, and this will be included in the resources, is something that Pixar has done. They've created, actually some other folks have created this really great series about storytelling from Pixar, and it's a really great way to think about context and specifically the way that time works in context and providing historical background and things like, because of that, because of this, until finally. It's a great way to think about context, providing that historical perspective for you and your research. But I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about something I use a lot on the day-to-day with a bunch of our researchers. And this is the way that I frame a lot of the conversations that I have, whether that's video or in writing, to kind of prepare them. So when it comes down to it, storytelling, think about the problem you're trying to solve, that higher level problem. What is that problem you're trying to solve? In the midst of that, include the scope of that problem. Maybe it's how many plants it affects. Maybe it affects this disease. This disease affects this industry in this way, etc. And provide any necessary background information. This might be new science. This might be building off of other foundational research. I think maybe a good way to think about that part is to think about maybe providing some kind of, low-key lit review section of your paper. That's like a great way to think about providing context in that sense. And then, once again, higher level, how does your research aim to solve those problems? Don't get caught up in the methodology, but higher up. How does it actually solve those problems? And what are the overall impacts of your work on ag, on science, on people? And be honest. It kind of drives me wild as a communicator when people start pushing things that aren't, they're too big, they're too broad. I think you guys know what I mean, but that's a pet peeve of mine. And then think about an attention grabber. Once again, we could talk about these all day long, but think about a way that you can bring in your audience through some kind of attention grabber. So this is a really quick example. Matthew Martin, he's a student and a research scientist under Brian Stephenson. He's working on, as you see, barley leaf rust resistance. We went out and I did a video with him, came back, looked at the footage, and I was like, Matthew, this just doesn't work for our audience. And really, at the end of the day, that was my fault. This is my job. I need to be putting the scientists in a way that, in a position that they can be successful, and I just didn't prepare him properly. But I looked back at my framework and I said, Matthew, take a look at this, and let's go shoot this thing again. So really, we came back to it. What's the problem we're trying to solve? Barley leaf rust resistance. This is for me, thinking about it in the form of the audience. It's not super detailed, so bear with me there. It's complex. End of story. Historical background. Known resistance genes have been defeated. What is he doing to solve that problem? He's looking for naturally occurring durable resistance. As a result of that, breeders can potentially use that information to create plants with durable resistance. We want to be really, really just straightforward, honest about that. It's just a matter of fact. And probably we grabbed the attention with the complexity of the disease and went into a little bit of depth about that disease and how it affects plants and the industry more broadly. And we were able to actually pull out a really nice piece from Matthew as a result of this. So taking that step back is really helpful, and taking that audience into consideration is helpful as well. This is kind of a Dylanism, but it's something that I use when I go out and after I've interviewed people, gotten some questions and some context. Write a foundation paragraph as a foundation for knowing what story you have to tell. Because this stuff is messy. Like, these are my literal notes the other day about a plant phenotyping story that I was trying to run. For me, I have to take into account, like, who's the funding partners and all these different audiences and what's all of this stuff that goes in that framework, and try to find a way to package it. It gets messy. And so this foundation paragraph is really for you. It's kind of a 2 to 4 sentence, be as concise as possible, paragraph that really gets you thinking about what your story is and how you can tell it. So you want to find a way to really look at it and say, this is my story. Does that mean that I want to tell this through video? Is this just something that I talk to growers about? Is it something I can just simply, create a blog post about? What is it? This is a great way to start, to know what story it is that you have to tell. It's an elevator speech meets a value prop, and it's a great way to get started, and it takes into consideration all these factors that we already talked about. And don't stress over this. Don't wordsmith this. This is mainly for you to look at, to see what that story is, and then just kind of iterate on that more broadly. When to write it, you've kind of gone through these exercises we've already talked about. You know what the topic is you want to talk about. You've taken into consideration those audience factors and what they're interested in, what their needs are, and you've found that common ground topic and had some initial thoughts about how you might tackle it. So, and this is noted on the extended version of our resources, a great way to think about this is that narrative framework that I just went through, plus taking into consideration a bunch of those audience factors, and you can find a way to write that foundation paragraph. And yes, this is something that I do. This mainly exists in my head, but when I'm really, really struggling, I do take the time to do this, and this is something that really, really helps put those pieces together. Now I know I might do a video series on this, or I might do a Facebook Live, and that's really what we're going to be doing for this plant phenotyping thing. Last but not least, and then we're going to open it up for some questions. If you walk away thinking, Dylan, you're full of crap and you don't remember anything, remember this. Communications is about being human. It's about communicating. That's really what it is. Being human and being social. Because you are human after all, and authenticity resonates, and it also builds trust. Trust is something that's really, really key. We're not going to dive deep into this, but it helps prove my point a little bit. This is the Edelman Trust Barometer. We won't get into that. They're the people that really come up with this huge, huge trust index. And so a lot of these numbers are really terrifying to me. But the point is, what's more believable? Personal experience slightly over data. Shocking. Be human, be social. Peers are now as credible as experts. So a person like yourself, so Dylan, a person that I perceive is like Dylan, is now as credible as a subject matter expert. Also terrifying. And now official sources are suspect. So this is where you guys can come in. Individuals more trustworthy than institutions. And I just pulled out some examples that I saw that were really, really interesting to me about how some universities are approaching this. Ohio State is an institution that should not feel institutional on social media. We are friendly, conversational, and down to earth, just like the Ohio State University itself. They're trying to take into account their own personal brand, their culture, who they are as authentic human beings, and put that into their social media strategy. Same thing with the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Describe their voice on social as inspired goofiness. Being a man from Wisconsin, I get that. And somebody who's doing, I think, a great job, and I would get fired if I didn't show this slide. No. I totally do. I think Jim is doing a really, really great job. And I think what Jim has honed in on, and I would encourage you to really think about if social is the place that you want to use, is what is your identity on social? Do you really want to go for this thing and make it about, science, communications, and some other things? But Jim is Jim on Twitter. This is authentic in a lot of different ways. You see all of the different things that Jim is interested beyond our department, beyond plants, beyond science. But we've got this post about Jim biking into work the other day, and I think it just works. It just resonates with people, and I was taking a look at the stats, and it does. And what's great about when I sit here as a communicator is I can leverage that. As an institutional communicator, I try and find ways that I can creatively use Jim to perpetuate some of the stories and provide a little bit more real voice, more broadly than just that institutional framework, because sometimes we get put in this scheme of, institutional selling. So A few more slides, but just get out there and do it. I've dedicated my life to this fight, but I need your help. There just aren't enough. You saw those stats about institutional communications, company communications, and I think you guys can really make a difference as individuals. So I would encourage you to go out there and start really, really simple. Don't overthink it. Do something that's really easy, and then push yourself, if it so inspires you, to push to those broad, non-science-based audience. This is something one of my professors is always talking about when it comes to brands, thinking, where can you dominate? Another way I like to think about that is, what's your sweet spot? What are you interested in? It could be something simple. You might be really interested in taking photos. You might just be an extension employee or just wanting to get out and talk to other people. Maybe you're a student and you want to talk to other students that might not be in science. Maybe you're a good writer. By all means, do the blog post thing. Figure out, I can't tell you in which way to tell your story. That's got to come from you in a lot of ways. So think about what you're comfortable with. Don't push yourself outside of that. But, do it in a way that works for you. And iterate. By all means, iterate. Whether that means you're looking at social media data and understanding what works, what doesn't, or just putting it in front of that audience. Maybe it's 1 or 2 members and they're shooting holes in that thing. Just get a real understanding of what's working and what's not, and just make changes. Last but not least, serve people. I, as a communicator, as kind of the people that I care about the most, we understand the great work and the impacts that science has done for us. And thank you all in this room for what you guys do. But at the end of the day, it's really about serving people, much like our science is. So I'll leave you with, please help me kind of tell those stories and bring science into people's everyday lives. Thanks. So we're going to open up for questions, but before we do, and both Jim and I are going to be up here so you can get his perspective as well. I know you guys have more conversation, your questions. If you do, follow us on Facebook. We're going to be doing some Facebook Live things and some other activities with actual subject matter experts at the U. So we'll be perpetuating that conversation about science communications. So I think that mic is on. It probably would be easier because we're recording this to step up to the mic, as intimidating as that is, and
yeah, and we've got lots of time for questions. We really do want this to be a discussion. And Dylan, do you have some online questions you want to share with? Is that right?
Actually, let's go into a few questions here, and then we'll do that.
All right. Who wants to step up to the mic and ask the first question?
Let me kick it off. Is it on?
Yes.
Okay. When I stepped in here, I heard one thing which really worried me, and that is we're going to talk science. And I think now you've already lost it. The general public is not interested in science. The general public wants you to solve some of their problems. You've got to identify what's in their head, what they're worried about, and try to accommodate that. It's very difficult to sell plant pathology or the science. You need to focus on what the problems is, and the problems have to do with people's food. So it's not too difficult for us to find issues. Just think about beer, wine, all the other stuff that comes from horticulture, in agriculture. People are interested in that. So find that common ground. Don't try to push science down their throat. I mean, we've done that for 100 years and it's not really working. Maybe you can comment on that if you...
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think in a lot of ways, too, it's that frame. I think like standing up on this pedestal and saying, I am truth and science doesn't really resonate with people. So yeah, I mean, finding that common ground in a lot of ways is what we do, but it is a difficult question because at the end of the day, we want to push science and we don't want to fluff it up. That's not what we want. And so we've got to find those creative ways to do that. And I know Jim and I have discussed time and time again, and we haven't quite gotten there yet, how do we promote things like publications and find easy ways to really translate that information, because that benefits us in so many different ways. So I don't know if I'm providing any help to your conversation there, but that's our reality of something we are struggling with, is how do we really hone in on some of those harder science issues.
And the point is very well taken and very well stated. We heard the same thing from Jack Bobo yesterday. He showed statistics that you start with science and you immediately lose people. And so the work that Dylan's done, that we're doing at the University of Minnesota, for example, really is geared towards understanding the audience. That's why Dylan focused so much on that. Understand what the motivation is, understand how the message can be phrased to resonate, because they are interested in it. It's really our approach to how we tell the story that needs to be tweaked. And that's the one thing we can actually control, too, in that.
Thank you very much for the session. I very much enjoyed it. I'm Christy Palmer with the IR4 project out of Rutgers, and I've got a question for you. It looks like you've formed a very good and successful team and have started to get other members of the plant pathology department to follow your lead. How have you been able to break the historical patterns we as scientists have to be able to start getting us thinking in different ways to tell the stories?
That is a great question. I think for me, where we started was some of our younger professors and almost using them as kind of a proof of concept in a lot of ways, and showing quick wins, easy wins. This is something that actually worked really well, so I could actually approach certain people in our department and say, hey, you know, because when I first got hired, that was probably one of the biggest difficulties, was actually me getting out there and people, you know, interacting with me in all actuality and be willing to even sit down. But now we have that, you know, some of those proof of concepts, and we can do that. I guess to answer your question more directly, I just try and sit down and talk with them. I think for me, I lucked out in that I have a videography background, and we spend a lot of time, you know, just interacting and connecting with people, and we find a way to slowly but surely prod them down this thinking of, you know, some of these things. And I think Matthew is a perfect example of doing that. And so for me, I push everything through the video strategy, and even if I don't do a video, because I've had that conversation, it's all recorded, and I've got that subject matter expert on there, and I can just mold the text in a way that I'm not missing anything, I'm not saying something incorrectly. And so that's one way I've done it. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, as department head, I think the most effective tool is that I tie pay raises to how many times you tweet a week. So, no, I'm totally joking about that. But we have, I do think there's a real need for leaders, whether you're leader of a lab group or leader of a department or a university, to really say this is important, right? We all talk about that. We all know inherently it's important, but the idea of outreach or communication, how do we actually value it as an institution? So in our department, for example, we've had really explicit conversations about the need for this. When I ran for, when I interviewed for the position of department head, this was one of the priorities I put forward. So there was never a surprise about that. I think Dylan is right that there is I have to be careful how I say this, but there's a demographic component to this. And you know, historically, science communication was, if it was even thought about at all, it was thought of after the fact. But I see many of our grad students now, many of our postdocs, our junior faculty really engaging in outreach, thinking about science communication throughout their research. So this is really changing. We've spent a lot of time hosting students that are interested in checking out University of Minnesota graduate program, for example. So students who come through, and almost every single one of them talk to me about science outreach or science communication. So it's clear that there's a demographic component as well. So we need to take the early wins, I think, find the early adopters and build from there.
Yeah, so I just wanted to follow up on the comment about solving problems versus you know, the fun of science. But I mean, that was a very good point that was made. I think we do need to make sure that we're focused on communicating to the public how we're solving problems. And I think it's also cool to have, and good to have, efforts where we just show how cool science is. I mean, your video of that fellow who was doing the microtome sectioning, I mean, that was just marvelous. And, you know, and it may not really tell people what's, you know, how we're solving the world's problems, but, you know, it's a recruiting tool, but it's cool. And I think people enjoy seeing that too. And you know, let's not forget science is more than a job. It's a human endeavor like art. And so I enjoy exciting people about this human endeavor. My question is rather simple. Is the Pixar framework that you listed, is that in your materials that link?
Yeah, so that'll be in the extended ones. And it's like this, it's actually a full-fledged series on storytelling just more broadly. The Pixar section is one of them. And so there's other things like visual rhetoric and how visuals play in, and there's just a whole bunch of stuff. But yeah, it's a really great kind of treasure trove for easy storytelling.
My name is Mark Ray. I'm with the Lighting Research Center at RPI. I feel like I'm piling on, and I don't mean to, but I've been Center Director for almost 30 years, and my background's in biophysics. What I had to learn that science is not engineering, and what people care about is solutions. So I'm not sure your premise is even correct, that people want solutions. So when we did the engineering for the Dreamliner, the Boeing Dreamliner, no one's ever asked me about the science that underlies it. They want to see the gadgetry, the cool lighting that comes out of it. So I guess my question to you is hopefully a meaningful one. That is that nowhere in the presentation did you define what success is. So it seems to me almost that's your first question. I mean, for us, it's the livelihood of our center. And so we have to recast the science into something that people can consume. We do lighting for Alzheimer's, non-pharmacological treatment. People get that, but they don't get the science. I mean, there's some that do, and if you're recruiting students, it's important to tell that story to them. But I think in plant pathology, there are so many great stories about solutions, but do people really care about the science? That's my question to you.
To me, oh boy, I get the tough one. Well, I think I do agree with you that the solutions for many folks that really is where the rubber hits the road, and depending on our target audience, the vehicle, the message that we're putting out there, that's highlighted much more prominently than the science. But to us, telling research stories as a land-grant institution, this is core to our mission. But the solution is maybe was it the hook or the
Attention grabber?
The attention grabber, right, to telling that story. So a solution that changes the world is a fantastic way to start that story. We're pushing the science out because we want to talk research. We want, for example, graduate students to understand that the research that we do in our department is something that will change the world. I think that's a really important message for potential students to get. Upper administration may not care so much about that piece of it, right? So we do have to tailor the approach and the message to the target audience. So it's not a one-size-fits-all thing at all. So I don't think you said anything I disagree with. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So that question about what is success, and that was really continues to be one of the frustrating things to me about communication, because you know, I'm a scientist. I want data. I want to see how things work, and it's often hard to get data for some of the communications components that you're doing. I mean, I know how many people are here in this room today. I don't know what you will do differently next week because you sat here for an hour. So that's something that we've worked on. Dylan actually, in his strategic communications training, is really focusing on. So there are metrics that are out there, and we do take a look at that, and we essentially do experiments. So if it's on Twitter, for example, we put a message out there, and there are metrics of how many people laid eyes on that, how many people interacted with that, how many people commented, et cetera. So that's one form of data that we get. You know, ultimately, though, thinking about a land-grant institution in our department, what are we trying to do? Well, we are trying to raise our student application pool and the various metrics that go along with that. So we want a high caliber student. We want to be more competitive for fellowship funding for students. We want to be more competitive for research dollars. So some of it is really driven and easy to define by an actual number, and some of it's a lot softer. We also want we want everyone in this room to have a good feeling for what University of Minnesota is. I don't have a metric for that, and that's one of the frustrations in communications for me personally.
I mean, one thing that we do is we don't do anything that's not metric driven. We're taking a look at everything and making sure. And yes, we don't. It's really hard because in any communications field to look at, like, this is Dylan. All of these interactions on all these different platforms made a difference, and now he's given to your department. Everything doesn't talk to each other, so you have to kind of get in and look at everything, but everything that we do is data-driven around our priorities and our goals, one of which is funding, student recruitment, all of these different things. We are taking a very close look, and I mean, I look at the metrics daily and alter accordingly on those.
And that's certainly true, but there are longer-term goals that, part of the reason that I'm personally engaged in science communications because I think I've got a moral obligation to do that. Right? I don't have data for that. I'm a scientist. I'm a keeper of knowledge. It's my obligation as a human being to contribute. So that's a lofty goal, right? I want, through science communication, to change public perception about science. I want them to understand something about the research process. More importantly, I want them to value, and maybe that's really where the solution piece comes in, but to value the research that goes on at a university and to support political candidates who are going to support science and science research. So some of the goals are really big and lofty. Some of them are much more definable, and I think the metrics have to follow that. Mm-hmm. But, as you work through this exercise and the various steps that Dylan led us through, that sort of shakes out. But you do have to spend time. You have to really think about communication. This is what he's taught me, by the way. I'm parroting him. But you do have to think about communication. It's not just about putting a message out there and expecting the world to consume it. You need to be really strategic in what it is. And part of it is defining what you want to achieve from it and how you're going to measure that.
And not to get super into the weeds, but for those long-term things, we make sure that we have a really, really tight grasp of a good set of places that we're getting our data from so we can see trends over time and how they look at them. So if you have people at your institutions, companies, whatever, please make sure that they're capturing all the data in all these different places. Because that was number one when I got hired, is we had to consolidate all of our different databases. And
Hi, my question's a little more technical. So I've been charged with creating these videos that highlight some of the research to reach the growers that we serve, but I feel like they've fallen really flat. So my question is, you do your foundational paragraph, but do you write a script? What part of the planning goes into your videos?
Yeah. So help me understand what you mean by falling flat.
Well,
I'm interested in that.
Yeah, so I started out just like writing scripts or having the other students in our lab write out scripts, and then they would try to memorize them and like read them for the camera, and we would try a couple different camera angles, but they're not very exciting. Our YouTube stats aren't super great, so I'm just looking for ways to improve. Yeah,
for sure. You're talking educational-based videos primarily?
Yeah.
And so what I typically, actually educational videos are one of the only things that I do like a ton of prep for because I have a ton of background in interviewing. But I kind of break it up into putting them in a position that they can be successful, and so I break it into questions almost that help them walk through that, because it's really difficult for anyone to stare at a camera. And I actually did this the other day for a video, and I was like, I'm terrible at this. No wonder I'm behind the camera. But break it up into questions if you can and lead them through that. That's one really great way to do that. Other than that, we just try in the best way possible to keep those things as concise as they can and really take a step back and remember why you're doing a video in the first place. You want to show something. So be sure that you're actually showing at a depth, like if you're showing like SDS syndromes, be sure that you're getting in there and you actually can see those at the magnification that you want. Other than that, I mean, those are pretty foundational things, but I would try some of those out.
Dylan, what do you think about scripting for video, educational video?
It depends on who you're working with. I think it's a good exercise for you to go through as the person conducting the video. It helps you get an idea of like the shot selection that you might need. Maybe one thing that you could do beforehand is write some really short, quick, easy questions for your subject, your interviewee to look through. That'll help you understand, oh yeah, I need a tight shot of this on the plant. I need to get this. So it helps you make sure that you're saving time and getting all those things. I don't believe in super hard scripts for things, but I think educational videos will help you a lot in setting yourself up for success from your point of view. But like I said, I break those questions up as much as you can, unless some of our extension people are really great. You just like give them a subject and they'll just go. But finding a way to do it in a really concise soundbite is key there. Yeah, thanks.
Hi, my name is Kiran. And I feel like, our research and whatever the presenting here in any kind of conference is more likely is data-driven or result-oriented, But we always lose the journey, how we will reach at the conclusion, What are the different difficulties and how we reach to the results. If there is we are developing a technology and at the end we say, oh, this is what we get. But what are the difficulties that person has faced? There we should have a platform there we can discuss that. Okay, so this is how I reach to this one, and I think at some point audience is interested to learn more about the journey than the results. So we should have somewhere we can document that or present somewhere like these are my challenges and how it should be or how it should not be done that way.
Yeah, that's a really great point, and something that we're trying out actually around this idea of plant phenotyping is I was like, this is kind of difficult for me to wrap my head around because there's not real tangible like outcomes yet with a lot of that technology, and so I was like, how do we tell this story in an authentic way? And so one of the things that we're going to test out is doing some almost like behind the scenes look at what goes on in research, what are the realities, setting up some ways that we can get scientists talking to one another on camera. Maybe that's an event, I don't know yet, to really like understand what is going into this science and the different perspectives and some of these challenges that we're facing. Because I think as from an institutional perspective, sometimes we're not transparent about this. We do, as you're right, focus on the success, and I think there's so much more that goes into that. And it also, I think, helps show the creativity of science and the difficulty that you're doing. So that's something that we're trying out.
The human element really is what you're talking about, and that'd be an amazing podcast. Have scientists come and talk about the process. If you want to host it, that'd be great.
Hello, my name is Vanina. You are the communicator for your department, but how do your department train the students you have to be good communicators?
Can I take this one?
In the future.
Sure. So we historically, for a long time, we've trained students in formal, seminar, how to give a good. I actually teach this class, and I can't quite spit it out. But we train students on how to give a scientific seminar, and we've got a pretty structured process that I think works really well. I'm very proud of all of our students who give great seminars. But really, when we think about science communication, we're thinking more broadly about that elevator speech, what you say at a cocktail party, how you talk to your mother about what you do. And so generally that's a non-scientific audience. And so that's really when we brought Dylan on to help us figure that out. And, this is a process for us. We're figuring this out as we move along. One thing that Dylan and our colleague Chana Johnson has done that's been really effective for us is to host informal training exercises around social media, for example. Dylan led a maybe 30-minute talk on how to use your iPhone to take good pictures for research applications or social media. We've talked about using Twitter, and we had a whole flurry of new Twitter accounts established in the department, and some folks actually adopted that and have run with it. We've done things around Facebook. So there's definitely, this capacity building piece, and that informal training has actually, I think the faculty more than the students have really participated in that, and we see that changing. But over time, as we've invested as a department in some of these communication strategies, the early adopters really got a lot of visibility, and I think everyone else in the department recognized that, and suddenly it became more valuable. So people were, more engaged in playing along themselves. So there's no one answer to it, but if you can build a community of communicators, it's been really effective for us.
So I think we've got time for one more. I apologize to the people that submitted questions online. There's some really, really good ones that we would need more time with. So if you have those questions, I'll either respond via email, or we can do it via social, or just come grab me. I'll be around. So go ahead.
So I just had a great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is marvelous. So I'm a department head, Sandy Pearson. When I think of getting messages across, I look in the mirror and I see me, I don't see Dylan. One thing I would ask is, it'd be wonderful if I could get some advice as to, I noticed when you had a picture of a student in the lab, you had a nice camera, you had a boom microphone. I don't know the mechanics, so if there was sort of a ABCs, Dummy's Guide to doing a video representation, that would be marvelous for people like me, because what kills me in my department is that we can't do TED-type talks. We don't have the capability right now. A suggestion that's kind of fun that we do is we have the staff from the office visit each of our laboratories twice a year, so that there's a connection between the staff and the people in the lab, including the faculty. What's nice about that is if you're doing a video, I hate talking to a wall or to a camera, but you get a faculty member or you get a student talking to the staff. They're non-threatening.
Yep.
It's your audience. They feed off it, and it's like a lightning talk.
Yep.
And it's just marvelous. So if you have faculty that, I don't want to give an interview to the camera, just say, we're bringing the staff. The office staff, you can give an interview to them, and they love it. So just something. But
yeah, that's really great. And what we
assistance would be great.
What we actually do is, if you can, find somebody who's knowledgeable and is really good at having conversations, and sit them off camera. Actually, what I do, because I've done this many times, is I put the two cameras up and I have that conversation with them. But yeah, that's a great point. It's so difficult to have a conversation at that camera. If you can stick a body there and someone who can make them forget that the camera's there, that's really great. Another thing I would say is, while I really, really value good production value, and sometimes production value gets in the way of good content, I heard this the other day, and you can't cover up a bad idea with good design. So if you have something that really, really resonates with your audience and you've got a really good frame, sometimes just having that content out there is great. I think about the stuff I interact with on social and Facebook, and it's really bad, quality, but I enjoy it. It's the content that, gets to me. So I agree, having some of those resources is great. And I've done sessions just with iPhones, iPads, simple stuff. As long as you have that good sound quality, decent sound quality. Yeah.
So Dylan, can you, I'm challenging him here in front of everyone, but can you put together a list of 10 tips of how to do a good video?
I can do that.
And we can make it available through that site. So there's content up there already. Come back in a week and there'll be more content.
So it looks like that's all the time we've got. Thanks so much for being here. Like I said, check out those resources. My email is actually on there. And also follow us on Facebook. We're going to continue this conversation, and you can always submit questions via our avenues or just shoot me an email.